Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the research release webinar for our latest report, The Educational Attainment of Chicago Public School Students. I'm Malone, a senior strategist at the UChicago Urban Education Institute, which is the home of both the UChicago Consortium on School Research and the To&Through project. So for anyone who doesn't know, in collaboration with the UChicago Consortium, the To&Through project aims to help increase high school and post-secondary completion for CPS students, particularly those who represent historically marginalized groups. And through this work, we aim to provide education stakeholders like teachers, counselors, administrators, nonprofit leaders, and most importantly, parents and students with data and research-backed knowledge on students' educational experiences and opportunities to have dialogue about implications for policies and practices. So today's event is actually part of a series of opportunities from the To&Through project this winter to think about what's impacting students' educational attainment. So next week, we're hosting our monthly To&Through Data Collaborative, which is a space for the presentation and discussion of new work in education data in and around Chicago. So we will be hosting Northern Illinois University, a team from there that helps manage the Illinois Post-Secondary Profiles tool. And the tool provides statewide post-secondary data directly from agency sources, and they'll present on the addition of equity profiles to the tool. You can register using the link in the chat. It's happening this upcoming Tuesday at 2 p.m. Central Time. On February 10th will be a research spotlight featuring Dr. Louise Seamster. I'm really excited about this one. She studies the racial wealth gap, which has led her to research the life-altering differences in student debt's impact on Black versus white borrowers. And Seamster was recently featured in a New York Times podcast to discuss her work that I found really impactful. So strongly encourage you all to come learn about the research and its implications. Finally, on March 1st, a research spotlight with Dr. Sharday Bania, whose research on the effects of offering an ethnic studies course to ninth graders was recently featured in the 74th annual roundup of research that changed the way we look at America's schools in 2021. So you can register for this event and the others using the links in the chat. Today, we're really excited to share some insights from our newest report and to release our annual series of data insights that visualize the latest rates of student attainment in CPS and the forces and factors that drive high school and college success. I actually designed these data insights and I designed them for you. So if you're ever putting together a presentation on what research says impacts freshman or college success, or if you're looking for a data viz with the latest info about rates of attainment in the district, please look to this resource. This year, there's some new additions, namely visits with our latest research on sophomore success, CPS student attainment by community area, and more. And if there's any visits that you would like to see in future iterations, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. The To&Through project has a really rich collection of other resources too. I think our most robust resource is the To&Through Milestones tool, which enables the public to look at data from high school enrollment through to college completion for the district level, individual high schools, and now for each of Chicago's 77 community areas. The tool is updated with the most recent data available on an annual basis, similar to the report that we're discussing today. The To&Through project and UChicago Consortium have been releasing these reports on CPS students' attainment for about 6 years now. We use it to assess the district's progress and really to spark conversations about our priorities going forward each year. This year's report provides high school graduation and college enrollment data from 2020 and college completion data from 2019. These data comprise the best, most recent data available at the time of our analyses. And while 2020 data only captures the impact of the onset of the pandemic, we still find the insights really relevant because the outcomes are the product of work in Chicago that has extended across so many years, particularly in the realms of college access and success. So there are a few lenses we look at the data through that are new to this year's report, namely by English learner status and whether students were ever enrolled in an option school, also known as alternative schools in other districts. So while we don't report on freshmen on track or college persistence this year, these rates are available on the To&Through Milestones tool, which I was just discussing. So one thing about the data in this report, it's descriptive, meaning that it provides a sort of state of the union, but it doesn't really answer the why. And understanding where we are is critically important in helping us see the effects of practices and policies, but leaving the why to the reader runs the risk that they'll intentionally or unintentionally ascribe the outcomes that we're presenting today to the choices and capacity of students and families, particularly those of color. So with all that in mind, there's a few caveats that we think are important to name at the beginning of this presentation. The patterns in these data cannot be separated from the legacy of racist policies that have plagued Chicago's history and continue to shape its present reality. We recognize the dangers that this outcomes data poses to the perpetuation of harmful stereotypes and narratives. So with that, there's a long history in Chicago, the entire country, of systemic racism that has included intentional economic and educational disinvestment in communities of color. And so any differences in outcomes by race are due to racial structures and embedded beliefs that actively seek to subjugate people of color, particularly Black Americans. And it's also important to name that the authors of this report, including myself, come from places of privilege, and our perspectives are limited by our position in broader society. But most importantly, to truly understand the data in this report, we need to seek out the perspectives of students and families. So we encourage you to put this limited but vital quantitative data in context and conversation with other research and your own experiences in the field. We've been ramping up our own efforts to collect students' perspectives and have two sets of resources so far. One is a podcast, and the other is a collection of student stories about navigating college transfers and leaves. Check them out. The link is in the chat. So before we begin, one note about submitting questions. We'll have a Q&A at the end. Use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation to submit questions. And we'll answer more clarifying questions during the presentation, and we'll save more complicated questions for the end to make sure that we get those answered thoroughly. All right, thank you so much for joining us again. And without further ado, I will pass the mic off to Jenny Nagaoka, Deputy Director of the UChicago Consortium and Senior Advisor of the To&Through project.
Great, thank you so much, May. So I'll be starting us talking about the post-secondary attainment index. But before we do that, just probably move to the next slide. Just wanted to start by showing you where this work began back in 2006, over 15 years ago. As many of you are familiar with, this was the headline in the Chicago Tribune, and it grabbed a lot of attention. It galvanized work that had already begun inside of the district, and it catalyzed many others to take action to really be making sure that more CPS students were going on to college and leaving with a bachelor's degree in hand. It really was a powerful moment in college access and college success movement in Chicago. But the headline was also misleading. It's what we now call the post-secondary attainment index. And, and this number was not destiny for the ninth graders in 2006. It's not describing a single cohort. What it was that it was describing what would happen to the ninth graders of 2006 if none of the numbers available then for high school graduation, college enrollment, and for college completion did not change. And the good news is that a lot changed for those ninth graders, and even more has changed for students who've started CPS since then. And today, on the next slide, when we take a look at the PAI, which now we do to include both 2-year and 4-year college completion, things look a lot different. So using the most recently available rates, if nothing changes, of 100 students who are in ninth grade in 2020, 83 will graduate from high school, 37 will enroll in a 4-year college, 14 will enroll in a 2-year college. And then 27 of that original 100 will complete college. One thing to note here is that these rates don't reflect the full impact of the pandemic. Now, this 27 is a lot higher than what we saw in 2006, and this also does include students who completed through 2-year college. But it's also really important to note that this 27 number is not nearly as high of the 74 out of 100 ninth graders who say that they want to complete college. So while we've seen some really dramatic and important improvements in the percentage of students who we project will complete a college degree or certificate, we're still a long way from what the aspirations are for those very same students. The other piece of good news is that the post-secondary attainment index, or PAI, is higher now than it was in 2011. However, so we've gone from 20.8% to 27.1% for our projection for the ninth graders in 2020. However, I think one thing we also need to pay attention to is that the PAI has flattened in recent years. So that, we're at 27.1 with 6.8% estimated to complete a two-year degree and another 20.3% estimated to complete a four-year degree. But these numbers have not changed that much since 2017. So that's something that I'll be unpacking. We should be paying attention to. I also want to mention that we have a tool, which is dropped in the chat, the PAI calculator, which allows you to create these kinds of estimates for your school or your district using your own rates. Okay, so the big question with what we're seeing with these numbers, with the increases in the more recent flattening, moving on to the next slide, is, so how did we get here? Going through the different milestones, where have we seen improvements and where have we seen flattening? So I'll be going through the different milestones, starting with high school graduation. So here, we're looking at the percentage of CPS students who completed high school within 4 years, and this is including students who completed through an option school. And a little bit later in this presentation, Shelby will give you a little bit more insight into those option students. So the good news here is that we see that rates have increased from 60% for the class of 2007 to 83% for 2020. So this is an increase of almost 25 percentage points. And as a quick reminder, the 2020 was the spring of the pandemic. So this does reflect what we were seeing at the early onset of the pandemic. And as a point of comparison, the national high school graduation rate is 86%. So CPS is approaching what the rate is across the country, which is also really good news for the district. And I think and I'm moving on to the next slide. This slide draws from the report that we released fall of last year. So this is a report from the To&Through project and the consortium, where we're looking at educational attainment by community area. And here, we're going back even further in time to the graduating classes of 2002 and 2003. So at this time, the graduation rate across the district was below 50%. And here we're looking at what the high school graduation rates were by the 77 community areas of Chicago based on where students lived. And at this time, in 2/3 of community areas, the high school graduation rates were below 50%. And then when we look at what it looks like in 2019, there aren't any community areas that have a graduation rate below 60%, even 60%. So we've seen this tremendous increase in high school graduation rate by community area. And if you look at the at the higher end, in 2000, 2003, only 2 community areas had a high school graduation rate above 70%. While when we look at 2019, in all but 14 community areas, their graduation rates are at least 80%. So I think, I think what I showed you before, it's really encouraging to see that high school graduation rates have increased considerably over the past 20 years. But I think it's even more encouraging to see that the rates have increased across the city, and that in each and every community area, we're seeing fairly high school graduation rates, and we're seeing much more equitable outcomes across the city. And then moving on to the next milestone of college enrollment rates. And so we'll be looking at students who enrolled in college the fall after high school graduation. And here we see the overall college enrollment rate in both 2-year and 4-year colleges is at the top of the graph. And we're looking at the rates between 2008 and 2020. the overall enrollment rate declined a little bit in 2020 compared to 2019. So in 2020, we are at 57.7% compared to 62.4% in 2019. And this was mostly driven by a decline in two-year college rates. And quick reminder, not that any of us can actually forget this, is that the fall of 2020 was the first year of the pandemic. And the declines that we're seeing here in college enrollment, particularly in two-year colleges, was something that we are seeing across the country. And so this is not a uniquely Chicago phenomenon, it's a national phenomenon. And the declines that we see in college enrollment were happening mostly in two-year colleges. Although on the other hand, I also want to remind us that like the CPS college enrollment rates are like the high school graduation rates are almost as high as the rate across the nation for recent high school graduates. One other thing I think it's important to take a look at is in blue. These are the four-year college enrollment rates. We had been seeing a steady increase over time until about 2017, but for the past few years, we're actually seeing something of a plateau in the four-year college enrollment rate. So it's hovering around 42%. So I think that's something else we're going to have to be paying attention to going forward. So the next milestone that we'll be looking at is college completion. And so when we look at, in the next slide, the college completion rate for the past 5 years, so we're looking at the college completion rate for the classes of high school classes of 2009 through 2013. So for the class of 2013, so these are students who graduated from high school in 2013 and immediately enrolled in a two-year college or four-year college and then graduated by 2019. So we're giving students 6 years to graduate from high school. And for the class of 2013, their rate was 46%. And so we actually saw a little bit of an increase in this past year for the class of 2013. So they're about 3 percentage points higher than what we saw in 2009. With a 2 percentage point increase in the four-year college enrollment rate and 1 percentage point increase in the two-year college enrollment rate. Okay, and then moving on to the next slide, I've been talking a lot here and I've given you a lot of numbers that have been seen as rates. Another really important lens where we can really start to think about the impact that these improvements have on students and how many students impacting is to look at the numbers. And so, so here we're looking at the college enrollment, the number of students who enrolled in college immediately after high school and their college completion. So if you look at the numbers that are at the top of the bars, this tells you how many students made an immediate transition from high school into college between 2007 and 2020. So in 2007, for the class of 2007, 8,754 of high school graduates immediately enrolled in college. If you go to the other side of the figure, in 2020, 13,063 made an immediate transition to college. So this is a pretty significant change. I mean, this is over 4,000 more students in 2020. However, it's really, I think the other thing that's really notable on this figure, I showed you before about how the rates changed in college enrollment. Here are the numbers. So in 2019, there were about 14,500 students enrolling in college and only 13,000 in 2020. So that's a drop of about 1,500 students enrolling in college in the course of 1 year. And again, this is reflecting a lot of the changes that were happening during the pandemic. And so now I wanted to turn over to college, oops, going back, sorry, still on that same slide. Looking at the other side of the figure and looking at college completion. So for college completion, we have 3 different categories. In blue, we look at the number who completed a bachelor's degree. The green shows students who completed at a 2-year college, meaning they completed an associate degree or certificate, and then the gray are the students who started college but did not complete within 6 years. So for the high school graduating class of 2013, which is in the middle of the figure, 4,618 completed a four-year degree, which is about 1,500 more students than who had completed in 2007. The number of students completing at a two-year college nearly doubled from 800 in 2007, so that's in the green, to about 1,500 for the class of 2013. So the cumulative effect of rising high school graduation rates, college enrollment rates, and college completion rates means that for every single CPS class, we're seeing a couple thousand more students completing college more recently compared to the graduating class of 2007. But I also don't want to forget the other side of the story. As more and more students are going on to college, we also see a lot more students start college but not complete. So for the class of 2013 in the gray, over 7,000 students made an immediate transition to college but had not completed within 6 years. And I think we need to think about this a lot because we've been hearing about student debt and the issue around that. And the experience of not completing college is particularly important for students. So like when students have debt, there's a huge difference in their employment and salary prospects if they've completed versus not. And we also need to think about how it means that as more and more students graduate from high school and going on to college, a lot of students are reaching college campuses, but more than half who do are not completing. And I also wanted to echo something that we raised in the community attainment report and has also been raised by e-viewing. And that's that the efforts to complete these educational outcomes like college completion are going to require changes, not just in high schools and colleges, but changes in the social supports that exist in students' communities, so that different issues like financial aid, transportation, housing insecurity are not preventing students from fully engaging in higher education. And with that, I will turn it over to Shelby, who will provide you some more details by student groups.
Thanks, Jenny. So now that we've looked at the high level rates that make up the overall PAI for Chicago, now we're going to drill down a little bit deeper and look at the same rates disaggregated across different student groups, starting with race, ethnicity, and gender. So first, what we're looking at here is the post-secondary attainment index broken out by race, ethnicity, and gender. So again, the post-secondary attainment index projects the proportion of current ninth graders who would go on to earn a degree or credential within 10 years if current rates of high school graduation, college enrollment, and college completion did not change. So again, we're seeing here at the top of this index that overall PAI for the district of 27% at the top. And then on the right, the proportion of ninth graders who aspire to earn a degree or credential, which is 74%, is also here again for reference. But so what we see when we calculate a post-secondary attainment index the same way as the district PAI for each race ethnicity group one at a time is that the PAI continues to differ really significantly by race, ethnicity, and gender. So specifically here we see that the PAI for Latino young men stands at 21%, and the PAI for Black young men stands at 13%. And what that means again is that if current rates did not change over the next decade, only 13% of the Black young men who are currently CPS freshmen would go on to earn a college degree within 10 years. But it is really important for us to remember, again, that none of these data are written in stone. Like Jenny said earlier about the overall PAI, this does not have to happen, and it won't happen if component rates improve over the next decade. Again, the high school graduation rate, the college enrollment rate, and the college completion rate. And we know that improvement on each of those milestones has looked different over time across different student groups. So to really understand the full picture here, we need to pay attention to each link in the chain one at a time. So now we'll look more closely at the specific rates disaggregated along these same lines to see which of the milestones are driving those high-level disparities in attainment ultimately. So first, we are looking here at the high school graduation rate by race ethnicity. So as you can see, there are still disparities in the high school graduation rate in the most recent year of data, the 2020 graduates, with about 80% of Black students graduating from high school, which is slightly lower than the district's overall graduation rate of 83%. But also in this graph, you can see that that gap has been closing over time. The graduation rate for Black students has grown from 70% in 2013 to 80% over this 8-year period. So on the next slide, we'll look at the college enrollment rate, the next milestone in the post-secondary attainment index. So over the past decade, the college enrollment rate has increased significantly for Latino students from about 47% in 2010 to about 58% in 2020. But over the same period of time, the college enrollment rate has declined for Black students from around 55% in 2010 to around 50% in 2020. And particularly since 2017, we've seen college enrollment rates actually flatten or decline for all of the race ethnicity groups. So although there was growth and actually significant growth in this milestone over time in the past, since 2017, that growth has really flattened and has declined for some groups of students. So on the next slide, we'll move to looking at completion rates. Yes, so first we're looking at completion rates for students who immediately enrolled in a 2-year college. So this is the percentage of immediate 2-year enrollees who completed any degree or credential within 6 years of graduating from high school. So including both bachelor's degrees and degrees and certificates from 2-year institutions. So what we see is that these completion rates are still relatively low for all groups of students, but particularly for young men within each race ethnicity group, the completion rate for 2-year enrollees is lower for young men than it is for young women. And then finally, we'll also look at the completion rates for students who immediately enrolled in a 4-year college. And I think what stands out in this graph is that fewer than half of Black students who immediately enrolled in a 4-year college in 2013 earned a degree or credential within 6 years. So still a majority of the Black students who are immediately enrolling in a 4-year college are not earning a degree or credential within 6 years. And again, we see that difference between the completion rates for young men and young women also among the immediate 4-year enrollees. So next we wanted to transition to sharing some data about students in options programs, also known as alternative programs. Options programs are schools that are intended to re-engage students who have left high school and also to support high school students who need a non-traditional schedule for one reason or another, or they need significant credit recovery opportunities in order to graduate from high school on time. So in the first figure coming up here, we're looking at the proportion of all CPS freshmen who ever attend an options program while they're in high school. So what this figure shows is that for freshman cohorts from 2007 to 2015, about 1 in 5 students touched an options program at some point in their high school trajectory, 18.3% for 2014 to 15 freshmen. And then now on the next slide, we'll see the high school graduation rate for that same group of students, that group of about 1/5 of the freshmen who attended an options program at some point while they were enrolled as a CPS student. So for the most recent cohort of students, around half of ever option students graduated from high school within 6 years of their freshman year, 48.9%. And that rate has increased over time from around 44% 8 years ago. So finally, we also disaggregated these attainment rates based on whether students were ever classified as English learners or EL students. In calculating these rates that are coming up, we used a method from a recent consortium report called English Learners in Chicago Public Students Were Ever Classified as English Learners, typically when they started CPS in kindergarten or when they first transferred to CPS. So not just at whether students were still classified as English learners when they entered high school, but at whether they had ever been classified as an English learner. And when we look at English learners this way, including all students who were ever English learners, we see that rates of high school graduation and college enrollment are extremely similar between students who were at one time classified as English learners and students who were never classified as English learners. So first here we're looking at high school graduation. And actually for high school graduation, the rate is very slightly higher for English learners than for students who were never classified as ELs, around 84% for ever EL students compared to 83% for students who were never EL and for the district as a whole. For college enrollment on the next slide, the rate is actually exactly the same for students who were classified as English learners at 61% as it is for the district as a whole and for students who are never classified as English learners.
Thank you so much, Shelby and Jenny. All right, so now we are going to take some audience questions. Let me just get Jenny back up onto the screen really quick. All right. So our first question is, as you both pointed out, the PAI stopped its steady rise after 2017. So what milestones should the district be focusing on to jumpstart its previous trajectory of year-over-year improvement, particularly based on priority groups of students in the district?
I think what we've seen is that there's been really steady, consistent growth in the high school graduation rate over time due to a lot of different work that's happened by high school practitioners at CPS. But we have, over the past couple of years, seen slight decreases in college enrollment, and over time, the college completion rate for students who immediately enroll in college has been pretty flat. Where there are still many, many CPS students who are enrolling in college and not ultimately earning a degree or credential. So I think that's the place where there's still the most opportunity to support more students in earning a degree or credential.
We got another question that's asking about English learners. Did we also compare completion rates for EL students, and were these similar?
Yeah, no, we actually don't have the data yet to be able to do a college completion rate for English learner students. I mean, we'll see. I mean, I do kind of wonder what those will look like. I think one of the things that Shelby showed, like one of the differences in the college enrollment rates for English learners is that they're a larger share of them are going to two-year colleges, and we generally see lower college completion rates for students who start at two-year colleges. So this is purely speculation, but based on existing patterns, it would not surprise me if the college completion rates actually look different for students who have been classified as English learners. Although the rates may not be different compared to like similar students who started at a two-year college, the overall rates may differ.
Thanks, Jenny. And can you clarify if the began as EL group means the same as former ELs, or does the began as EL group include students who ended their high school career as English learners?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So the students who are classified as English learners, it means both current English learners and students who have been classified at some point from kindergarten on. So a lot of students start off as English learners when they begin school, but quite often they are exiting the program around first or second grade or even earlier sometimes. So a lot of these students who were, who had been classified as ELs have not actually been in the English, would have not been classified as English learners for, 10 plus years.
Thanks. And this next question might be, it's not exactly answerable with the data, but I'm definitely curious to hear your guys' perspectives. To what extent might increases in offerings of dual enrollment help with more students enrolling in college?
Oh, actually, I think that is a particularly good question because I actually started a research project last year looking at dual enrollment, dual credit, and advanced placement courses. I think it's a really promising approach. I will kind of give you more empirical evidence in a year or so. Dual enrollment there's a lot of evidence supporting dual enrollment programs. I think the benefits of it is that you get both the kind of academic rigor that is implied by taking courses at the college level. Students are able to have that experience, and students are also having the experience of actually being on a college campus. And so college isn't something that they just know about in the abstract, but less so more recently, but in normal times, they have the physical experience of walking around a college campus, interacting with other college students, so they can really see themselves as college students in ways that other types of high school courses may not actually provide.
Thanks. Dr. Alvarez asked, the high rates of high school graduation, but low rates of college completion is predicted given the low scores many students attain on college readiness assessments. I would also say that, GPAs are better predictors of students' college completion, and we know that not all of our students are graduating with above a 3.0 GPA. But so do we have a metric that stratifies students based on their college readiness, which I would say, GPA could be an indicator of that, or their SAT scores? I think maybe on our To&Through milestones tool, if you could speak to that.
So on the online tool we do, you can look at what these numbers look like by GPA. And as May mentioned, GPA is a better predictor of college completion than SAT scores. The other thing that is also really shapes whether or not students complete college above and beyond college readiness, which matters, is also the college that they attend. So there's a lot of the variation that we see across college completion rates are actually happening by where students go to college. So even if students have similar demographics, similar academic characteristics, we're also seeing that where they go to college matters quite a bit. So there's a combination of preparation and what happens to students once they enroll in college, which is a parallel what we see in high schools. So thinking about students' 8th grade test scores, their GPAs, and how much more things like what happens to them in high school, whether or not they're on track at the end of freshman year, is a much better predictor of high school graduation.
Thanks, Jenny. And we've got a few questions about national comparisons. You gave us, information that we're closing in on the national rate for high school graduation and for immediate college enrollment. But what about college completion? How does Chicago's college completion compare with the national rate or for other large districts?
Yeah, I guess I realize I'm answering a lot of questions, Shelby, so feel free to jump in. I know I'm trying to remember what the 2-year college completion rate is. I'm less familiar with that, but when we think about like 4-year college completion for students who start off at a 4-year college, for CPS, our numbers like roughly about 50%, and the national rate is generally about 60%. So there is some pretty big differences in the 4-year college completion rate for CPS students. At least there's a bigger difference relative to what we see for college enrollment and high school graduation. If that's answering your question.
Yeah, I think the two-year rate, the two-year national rate for comparison is that I think about 33%, so a third of students who started at a two-year institution nationally completed a two-year degree or certificate. So that's only slightly higher than the completion rate for CPS graduates, which was 28% for the most recent cohort.
Thanks for that, Shelby. And so we've also gotten a few questions asking what districts and pre-college programs should focus on to improve college enrollment, persistence, and completion post-COVID. I know that this isn't a qualitative research report, and so it'll be difficult for us to identify, the exact factors that are limiting enrollment and attainment post-COVID, but wondering if you guys have any insights about what specifically high schools or pre-college programs could be focusing on post-COVID.
I know we're both being too polite and not answering the questions. So, I'm just trying to think of like different things. I'm just kind of going back to a report that Shelby and I and others also did together with college during the pandemic. And I think what was interesting was that the pandemic, even though it clearly had a huge impact on students and their experiences in colleges, it also opened up some opportunities for higher ed institutions to try out some different things. And so we saw where a few colleges, so it was Northern Illinois University and Shelby, fill in my brain here.
Western Illinois University.
Western Illinois. Thank you, May.
Thank you, May.
So I was trying to remember what direction it was. Yes, it was Western Illinois. They tried some different things that were a little bit different and innovative they had been thinking about for a while. So like, for example, switching to not using test scores for merit-based scholarships, and how that actually changed who was receiving these fellowships, and really opened up a lot more opportunities and made Western financially a much more viable place for a lot more Black and Brown students. So there's some things like that can happen. I think, I kind of mentioned earlier talking about, I think when we think about college, we tend to focus on the academic barriers that students face to going to college, which are real. It matters in terms of how you're able to engage in the class. But I think the place where there's a lot more work to be done still are around just the other types of things that get in the way of students being able to engage in college. So whether it's having to work, like the financial aid package is not being sufficient to actually pay for all expenses, or students having to also be supporting their families in different ways, whether it's taking care of siblings or others at home, or having to work more hours. Those are things that are really real and difficult. So those matter. Things like transportation issues, other types of emergency loan programs have shown some promise as well. And also helping students, so colleges are getting better at offering these things. It also helps when the agencies and systems within a city are also kind of there making things more accessible, but also helping students be more aware of the types of supports that colleges are increasingly offering to them. So there's a lot of possibilities there.
Yeah, I agree that we've seen a lot of innovation on the college side that's really important, where colleges have been able to experiment with new policies and new student supports, and really like a new way of thinking about their responsibilities in supporting students. But I also think on the high school side that thinking more about pathways for students who don't immediately enroll in college is going to be increasingly important too, given that we have started to see declines during the pandemic in immediate college enrollment, particularly in immediate two-year college enrollment. So many students who may have otherwise in a more normal year enrolled immediately in a two-year college last year didn't affiliate immediately with a college. And so I think we'll need to think about new ways to support those students who didn't make that immediate transition from a CPS high school to a college.
Thanks to both of you, and not to insert too much of my own perspective, but I read a really interesting qualitative research report that One Goal issued recently. About half of the student interviewees were from Chicago, and they had all stopped out of college, I think within their first couple of years. And some of the things that students talked about really echoed some conversations that the To&Through project had with students this summer, which is students are entering their first year of college, having their financial aid all set, and then they come to realize that actually tuition is going to increase every year. And so their aid isn't going to cover it all, or there's some non-renewable sources of funding, or they end up not being able to actually renew that funding after all. And students don't feel like they have the capacity to both succeed in college and be looking for new sources of funding so that they don't have to take out student loans. And so I think that I read a lot of students wishing that there were more supports for, first of all, figuring out how their financial aid package is actually going to look over time. But then, if something does happen where some funding is not non-renewable, the steps that they need to take in order to close those sort of gaps in funding that they're inevitably going to experience because of that. But yeah, so another question is, this is interesting, and I'm not really sure if this is possible, but someone asked whether, we can think of like a sort of 5 essentials for like the Chicago city colleges or 4-year colleges, like whether that's something that we could look into, or whether like the nature of the, higher education institutions as educational organizations is so vastly different from that of like the K through 12 realm that a 5 essentials might not really be able to apply.
The fundamental part of like the 5 essentials is like, is organizing schools for improvement. And so I think kind of the organization of colleges, I think there's probably a lot of parallels to what would apply in college that we found in elementary schools and high schools. The consortium also had a project before, which is expanding the 5 essentials to looking at early childhood centers, and found a lot of similarities. There were some differences, but there's a huge amount of overlap. And I would imagine something similar in for colleges as well, where, instruction matters, having some kind, I think there's some things that may be different about like professional development, having ongoing growth I think it would be important in colleges, but there's sort of a less of a focus for colleges, and thinking about the kind of professional community that exists in colleges is also something that would be interesting. I think it may be different, but I think there's some fundamental ideas where there could be a tremendous amount of
so another question is, college completion rates among CPS graduates who delayed enrollment in college or did not enroll in college have declined year over year between 2010 and 2013's graduating classes, despite completion rates rising for immediate enrollees in the same time period. So how should we be thinking about this trend given the declining immediate enrollment rates in the district? Should we be alarmed? Is it a cause for concern in your opinion?
I think it's hard to know exactly what that decline in immediate enrollment will translate to. During the pandemic, we don't know if those students will enroll in college at a later time, whether this was just a temporary hurdle because of the pandemic. But for now, we have seen that the vast majority of bachelor degree completers continue to be students who immediately enrolled in a 4-year college. And I think actually about 3/4 of students who earned any type of credential had immediately enrolled in a 4-year college. So that continues to be for CPS students, definitely the most promising path to a four-year credential, but we know that there's lots of reasons that students don't enroll immediately in a four-year college or aren't able to. And so it's just, I think it's hard to say at this point what those initial numbers from the first year of the pandemic will end up meeting for students' long-term attainment.
Another question is, are there strategies to address the large discrepancy in the rates at which students in different race/ethnicity groups expect to attend college? I don't think we actually have data on, or provided data in this report on whether students' aspirations to complete college credentials differs along lines of race and ethnicity. Yeah, so I think it might be a question of maybe not like expect to attend college, but are actually immediately enrolling in college. So, can we think about immediate college enrollment as having solutions that, specifically speak to students of, specifically target students of different race/ethnicity groups?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually kind of at the crux, I think, of a lot of what the transition that's happening in higher ed, because college was designed for a largely upper middle class white population, and so a lot of the structures and supports that are available, and there's a lot, we work at the University of Chicago, which is a very nice university, and there's a lot of different things available. But I think the types of supports that are needed by the majority of college students 20 years ago is really different than what is needed today. And so I think starting to happen now in higher ed is they're starting to engage in the changing population that are coming to their campuses and what kind of supports are needed, and they're quite different. So thinking about what a Black student coming from, Hyde Park High School is probably different than a white student coming from New Trier. They may both have different types of supports that they may be needing, but they're going to look very, very different. And so starting to engage in those types of questions is important. And, especially as, for a lot of colleges, there has been a dramatic shift in the demographics of who's coming, and hopefully that will continue. And so I think engaging in the students and finding out from them who they are and what they need is going to be really important. So it's kind of, I guess I'm first saying, it's like, I think it's both, I think we can both have suggestions, but I think it's also the work that the colleges themselves need to be thinking about too.
Mm-hmm. And I think from a high school practitioner angle, like there are ways that we can be thinking about, even within a particular school, how to target gender disparities, for example, in college enrollment. I know that at our charter school, Charles Alexander started a really interesting initiative where he created a one-goal cohort that was entirely Black young men at the school. And together, those Black young men raised their GPA by a full point between junior and senior year of high school, which we know is a huge predictor of whether or not they will actually complete college. And so I think that we can really be thinking like at a localized level about our initiatives in ways that honor, the different identities of the students whom we serve. I've also been seeing some questions here about tracking the indebtedness of students who don't complete, CPS students who don't complete, and its implications for their livelihoods. And I would just encourage you all to RSVP for our next research spotlight, where Dr. Louise Seamster will be giving a national perspective on this. It won't exactly be a Chicago-based perspective, but we can certainly extrapolate its implications for the Black young men and women who we're sending off to college and who aren't completing degrees in our district. So the link to that, to RSVP, is in the chat. We also got a question about whether this presentation will be available. It certainly will be on the UChicago Urban Education Institute's YouTube channel. And you can download the research report and data insights where we pulled all of these figures from on the To&Through website. And yeah, just really encourage you to use these resources. We make them for you. If there's resources that you want that we don't have yet, reach out to us and let us know so that we can work with you. And just thank you so much all for making the time today to think about what is impacting our students' educational experiences and how we as adults can, improve that for them. And thank you so much, Jenny and Shelby, for your invaluable perspectives today. All right, and with that, I will let you all go. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I hope to see you all soon at our upcoming events.
Thank you
Bye
so
all.
much, everybody, for coming.